thanks for being here. My name is Zac Schultz. I work for Wisconsin Public Television, and I'll be asking most of the questions for this panel. I'm sure they'll feel free to ask each other questions as well. Let me go through some quick bios. You've already met Professor Carpenter, the director for the Center of Limnology. He also says that he likes to be involved in the lakes and more than just studying them, actively involved, but also with things like Trout Unlimited. Immediately to my left is Brennan Nardi. She's been with Madison Magazine for 14 years and the editor since 2005. They've won a lot of awards, including the Press Club named her Editor of the Year in 2007, and she's also been a member of the Clean Lakes Alliance. Again, to her left is Melissa Malott, an executive assistant to Dane County Executive Joe Parisi, where she focuses on the county's environmental policy and programs. Prior to this, she was with the Dane County Lakes and Watershed Commission and also the Water Program Director at Clean Wisconsin. And finally, Don Heilman is president and co-founder of the Clean Lakes Alliance, which recently completed a strategic plan for a 50% reduction in phosphorus in the lakes. He's also the founder of Yahara Pride Farms, a farmer-led group with the goal of implementing good conservation practices in agriculture. So my first question is, we're going to start with a little bit of a two-question for the panel. Is there one scenario that strikes you as more realistic or more likely? And which of those scenarios would you like to live in? Anyone want to go first? I see you smiling, Steve, so you're first.
I really tried hard to make my personal belief about the probability of each scenario around 25%. So I honestly I think they're all completely plausible, and I wouldn't be surprised if any of them happened. But I think it's much more likely that some mix of the four scenarios will occur, and I have no idea what that's going to be.
Any preference for which one you'd want to be in?
No, I would definitely build my utopia from pieces of all four.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to take a mix of those scenarios for sure. The one that gets me all jazzed up is the technology side. There's a lot of that already going on in the watershed and elsewhere, and it's really exciting to see all of the new, the little laboratories in garages and on the UW campus that are trying different ways to make changes and adapt to the farming technologies and things that are out there, especially as it relates to the digester. Really excited about technology. I think that's the one I'm most excited about.
Melissa?
I don't want to sound like a pessimist, and I think that generally I am an optimist, but the one that really scares me is the abandonment and renewal. And as I was reading that scenario, there were several things that stood out to me as indicators of inaction that, I don't know if it's because the National Climate Assessment came out this week or what, but really resonated with me as things that are going on now that lead to that type of scenario. So it kind of scared me as I was reading it because it seemed like the most indicators of what's going on were in that. The one that I like the most, if I was going to pick a scenario, it would be difficult to choose. The Connected Communities was really, really wonderful to read, and I like the idea that our social values change and that we focus in on efficiency and non-materialism and connection to nature and people. I think that's something that needs to happen, and while we talk about dealing with climate change and adaptation and mitigation, and that's all very, very important, we don't talk about energy efficiency enough. So that idea of becoming a little bit more frugal, to me, seems appealing, and that in the face of that lessening of material wealth, we improve and build on our personal wealth, I think sounds very appealing.
Great. Brennan?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, but the prospect of motherless meats is a little much for me. So what I'm seeing right now, I'm sort of coming at it from maybe a little bit of media, a little bit of business, a little bit kind of community and public engagement, is that there's a lot of collaboration going on right now. So I see little snippets of each of the 4 scenarios, and I don't lose hope as much maybe as Melissa might when thinking about it. But I do think it's important to look at what's working and what isn't. And, you know, organizations like the Clean Lakes Alliance and the work that they have done and this project to sort of build on the foundation of what makes this watershed, what its history is and what is its future, I think are models. And I think if Madison and the Yahara watershed can look at being a model for what the future looks like, I think that might be in our wheelhouse because we have all of the components to drive that. When you think about food or entrepreneurship or, you know, believe it or not, pretty good government, I think we have a leadership role to play, not just here, but in other places. So if we imagine what Madison can look like, I think we can imagine what other places can look like as well.
Each of the 4 scenarios required a disaster of some magnitude before the changes took place. And this may go to the heart of your pessimistic worldview of people, but do you think it will require a disaster of some magnitude before we head down the path of changing attitudes?
I'll jump in maybe. I have a book here. It's kind of a little bit of a Bible to me lately. It's called Regeneration, and it's by Rebecca Ryan, who's a local columnist for the magazine, but she's also an economist and a futurist, and she wrote this book called Regeneration, and she talked about how we are a season-based sort of society. So winter, spring, summer, fall. So we've had 4 winters is how she describes it. And this isn't her theory really, but she builds on it in the context of where we are now in our 4th winter. So you had the American Revolution, you had the Civil War and Reconstruction, then you had the Great Depression, and then now you had, she marks the most recent winter as starting on or about 9/11, and then heading into the recession. So we're in a winter now. So, you know, I think what we'd be heading into next, if you look at it from that particular theory, is a spring. And has the worst already happened? Maybe not. But I think that the worst sort of builds upon itself. I mean, you're seeing the storms and you're seeing, you know, everything that's happening now and all these different areas. But if I want to think of it as we're in winter right now, and what we look at spring, we look at things like what's happening now with this kind of modeling and what we can do into the future, so that if these big disasters do happen, we're in a better place to provide solutions.
I really think I'm not a pessimist, but climate change is pretty scary. Every major piece of environmental legislation has come about after a major disaster. So I think that a disaster has to happen in order for most of the scenarios to happen, or the type of change that was legislated. But that hasn't been working lately. Like the BP oil spill did not result in changes to drilling regulations, and there have been a series of other environmental disasters that have happened where it has not resulted in substantive change. So this is one of the reasons why I think that the social values change, or the connected communities, is really interesting, because there were some disasters that were mentioned in that, but the social revolution seemed to be because people gained a better understanding, or they tended to value certain connections more than other ones. So, you know, if we're not able to, if our government isn't able to respond to huge disasters anymore, it takes, I think, a change in how people connect to each other and how people prioritize problems. And so to me, that's why, I guess to answer your question, I don't think it has to take a disaster, but I'm sure that there will be plenty of opportunities to do so.
I also don't think it's going to take a disaster, and I think that the reason why we're, as the Clean Lakes Alliance, have been trying to rally as many of the community as we can to get a better understanding of what's going on. And this project is perfect for forward thinking about looking at what could be done, what needs to be done in order to make sure that the disasters are mitigated ahead of time. And so we've got a lot of work that's being done, as I said, in technology, and I think there's going to be, in the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to be really exciting to see some of these come from the test tube to the farms and to the fields and be used and integrated into people's systems. But I also see changes, there's very strong changes in planning now in communities that really weren't planned very well back when we built this city, building Monona and part of the isthmus and shopping centers and golf courses on wetlands that were supposed to filter all of that gunk, because that's not going to be overturned now, but we need to not let that happen any further, and we need to build the next set of subdivisions and growth that happens has to be smarter built, and we need to all be doing different things, and I think all of those things are being done. So it didn't take a disaster to start that. It just takes a lot of more attention and aggression and movement towards that goal.
Well, Don, I appreciate your perspective, but I think a few well-placed disasters could do wonders for those developments on wetlands. I believe that both disaster and opportunity are needed, and the disasters can't be too big, but they've got to be big enough. People respond to short, sharp shocks, but people also act on wealth gradients. People respond to problems by moving on wealth gradients, either moving physically or by changing their behavior on wealth gradients, which could be new opportunities for industries, as in the technology scenario, or opportunities for water as a crop, as in the nested watershed scenario, or opportunities for more family and community time. Time is wealth as well, and time to get out of the rat race and do something more rewarding is a tremendous incentive. So my guess is that it'll be a mix of short, sharp shocks and new opportunity.
So for this next question, I just want a 5-second answer, very quick, and then I'll follow up on those answers. In your current line of work, what do you consider to be long-term planning? We'll start here, Brennan.
5 seconds? Oh, my current line of work, long-term planning, is what's working and what isn't in this community right now.
I'll rephrase that a little bit. Give me a time
Did I
span.
get the wrong
6
answer?
months, 1 year?
Oh, sure, sorry. I look out about a year and a half.
What's that?
Long-term planning, I view as 20 to 30 years.
Okay, Don?
5 to 10.
I'd say the length of the Holocene, about 10,000 years. The Holocene, as you may know, is the extraordinarily stable period of climate and environment that's existed for the last 10,000 years. It's the period of time when all of the great civilizations arose, including the civilization that we're in now, and it's the era that is ending due to greenhouse gas emissions, and the Holocene is giving way to the Anthropocene, and nobody knows what's going to happen.
That was more than 5 seconds.
You get
Sorry. 10,000 years is the quick answer.
Given what you consider to be long-term planning, how can anyone in this room or any policymakers or people that are in the position to make big changes, how can you get them, or how can you help them to think beyond that to something as far out as 2070? Don, I want to start with you.
Well, I think we need to look at what is this community going to look like if we continued on the path that we're on now. This community's grown in the last 50 years. We've, I think, quadrupled in Dane County in population. The U.S. and the world has tripled, and yet our acres for farming has reduced by 100,000 in Wisconsin, and I don't know, a lot of millions in the state of Wisconsin. I think 5 million in the state of Wisconsin. So how are we going to feed the people? How are we going to continue to do the things we're doing and still not continue to beat up our natural resources? So we need to be thinking about how do we continue to have agriculture be a big part of our business model here, and yet sustainable with the growth of our county.
Melissa?
I think one of the reasons I'm excited about this project actually is because I think that this is a great way for us to plan for the future. We're using science-based models to come up with ideas about the future and understand how our decisions play out, what it could look like, how it will affect people, and hopefully this will generate a lot of public dialogue, which is another piece of that. Getting feedback from people and that discussion about what we want is really key. So I think that this is a great way for us to plan for the long term.
Brennan?
I think it's really important to get to reach out beyond our sectors, our circles, our own networks, and kind of look at the Yahara watershed maybe as an ecosystem, and then look at the champions of the ecosystem and look at that in leadership. And we have new leadership here now because we're seeing a generational shift in our community. If you not, I study Madison. I don't study, I study mostly the city and government, and it's my job to sort of, know the community in all of its various forms and functions. And there's this crop of new leaders. I think you count the county executive among them. I think you could count the folks at the Clean Lakes Alliance among them. You can look at the Chamber of Commerce, who's changing the business climate in Madison for the better. And if you look at education, the new school superintendent, and looking at different ways to solve sort of age-old problems, or just saying, do we have to say, here is who caused the problem, here's to blame in order to find a solution. And I think a lot of these new leaders are looking at these challenges and saying, okay, let's just not think about how it happened. Let's think about how we're gonna fix it and how we're gonna move forward. So I think new leadership is gonna play a huge role.
Steve, I want to build off something that Don was talking about, and that's about agriculture and dairy. And one thing that's present in all four scenarios is a dramatic decrease in the amount of corn especially, but other row crops. Obviously, large farming operations are pretty much non-existent. How do you sell that in America's dairyland? How do you convince people when they talk to the legislatures to say, well, we want to see this gone or be reduced or changed drastically when it's clearly going in the other direction at this time?
Well, certainly the current system we're in requires agriculture in many ways. I mean, we need it for food production. We need it for production of industrial feedstocks, which is actually what most of the agriculture in our watershed goes to. It's not food, but feedstocks. And we actually also need agriculture to keep the land undeveloped. Because being able to make money from the land is a key factor in keeping land undeveloped. The scenarios explore several different ways of dealing with this. In the technology scenario, the land is being used to make money, and it's being used pretty heavily, but it's being used in a way that minimizes pollution of both the atmosphere and the water, taking advantage of the technological developments that occur over that period of time. In nested watersheds, water's a crop, and the Southwest and California will pay a lot for water, and that's where the financial wherewithal comes from to make water a crop in our region and the whole upper Midwest. The values change scenario, there is a great deal of production of food that's used right here, done in a moderately intensive way that again has a very low footprint on the atmosphere and on the water. So the land is not urbanized, and it's not fallow. It's just used in a different way in all three scenarios.
Melissa, going off that same idea, how will your boss County Executive Parisi address the corn makers or the dairy producers, the milk marketers, or the cheese makers when they say, we see these scenarios as a implicit threat on the way we do business now, and we don't want to change the way we do business now?
That's a rough question for me to answer right now. Can you just say it one more time?
How do you think he's going to react to this? Is this something that, obviously, they won't like the outcome of these 4 scenarios, and when they bring public pressure, how do you get a policymaker to choose between, well, the long-term scenario says that we need to shift away from this, where the economic engine in the area says this is our future?
I don't know if I agree that the corn makers or corn growers and soy groups will dislike it, not because we grow as much corn as we do because it is a feedstock, because our food bill subsidizes it. I don't think 100% of the people growing corn, like in their souls, want to grow corn. I think that they're doing it because it's the business model that they have set up. So if, under any of these scenarios, corn does not support a business model that currently exists right now. So I don't think it's a threat to agriculture. I think that what we're talking about is changes in the markets that are driving certain business structures. So I don't know how that all is going to play out. I hope that the corn growers and producers see that in it and don't view this as an attack on them. I don't think they will, but I don't know how. My boss doesn't control the farm bill, of course, so I think if we're talking about what changes are going to happen in our landscape, we can talk about what federal market drivers there will be, what local market drivers there will be, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities at the local level to change the way the markets are shaped right now and better respond to the needs in our watershed. So, that's an answer we're researching right now, but I don't know what the answer is.
Okay. Don, from your perspective on the lakes, can the clean water in the lakes coexist with large-scale industrial farming and row crop farming, or does something need to change?
Definitely something needs to change. There's no question. One, as duly noted, the rain events are washing a lot more manure into the lakes than previously. So corn is a big problem with that because it's an easy vehicle to get it there. But the problem with stormwater on farmland is big. But the amount of manure that's being applied to the farms is big as well. And the ways that we can make change there is with how we figure out how to process it. I think that farmers are looking for ways, looking for innovations, and this is the only thing that they've been given a lot of new technologies in producing milk and producing crops, but they haven't been given any new technologies except the manure digester now is just one way that's being tested and fixed and tweaked and so on. But they need a solution for manure, and we need to be able to come up with that in order to have the lakes survive agriculture as it is right now. There's a lot of things that are being done to work on processing manure back into fertilizer that can be applied and not slopped on the fields in a more technical way, a more precise way. But things need to change and things need to be innovated so farmers can take advantage of them, and they're just behind right now.
Brennan, besides your work with Madison Magazine, you also own the Harmony Bar and Grill.
Yes.
You serve a lot of burgers there. Is the demand for that ever going to change? Can the customers, the people you interact with, who do support the values that we're talking about today, can they give up or pay a higher price if that means cleaner lakes, cleaner environment around them?
Well, I live on the Near East Side, and the business is on the Near East Side, which is very progressive and very informed citizenry. So, and the walnut burger sells almost as well as the regular meat burger. So,
What's the name of the business?
it's the Harmony Bar and Grill. So I think that if you take that back out to the watershed, I think the intersection of the university and the capital city, and then if you look at Madison historically and just who we are, and then you build on that with new leadership and public-private partnerships, I just really think that we are again in a position to respond to the worst case scenarios, in addition to what Don gets excited about is the technology. So do I think we'll ever stop eating burgers in my lifetime? No.
So what is the first step? We have these scenarios, but there's no calls for government action at the moment. It's certainly not at the federal level, probably not at the state level, not even that much at the local level. And we have to talk about the impacts of where that first initiative has to come from. Melissa, can you address, does it have to come from a higher level than county government, or can they make enough of an impact to start the ball rolling?
I think we're in a really unique situation, and that is because a lot of the stuff that's happening around our lakes right now is driven by a Wisconsin rule called the phosphorus rule, and there's this thing in it called the adaptive management option. That is the first of its kind rule in the country, and MMSD and Dane County and all of the partners to that are helping make that come together. So I think it's already, there's a lot happening right now that is because there's been pressure on local government. There's been something that's happened at the federal level, and it's happening here in a way that's faster than other places in the state and country where it's either slow or deficient or not happening at all. So it's hard for me to answer that. I think that if we wanted to direct our country toward any one of the government structures in the scenarios, whether it's nested watersheds or an innovation revolution, there would have to be a substantial increase in pressure for something to happen at the federal level. But I think that we do have the power to shape what's happening at the local level and set a model for the rest of the country, like Brennan said. And I think that that's happening.
Don, that leads right into the Clean Lakes Alliance and local nonprofits. What can they do, or have you reached the end of what your mission can do, or is there another level beyond the county or the local as far as advocacy and starting that pressure to make changes?
No, I think the collaboration that we've helped put together with the county and Department of Natural Resources and the farmers and all the folks that are sitting around the table now that are collaborating, as Melissa said, on this adaptive management approach. We need to give this a really good shot. This is our time to be able to do something without a regulatory approach and really spend our money wisely and make major changes in agriculture and in the urban environment to reduce phosphorus and get these lakes cleaned up. And we've got an opportunity now. Everybody's at the table. Every municipality in this watershed is involved. The sewer district, the UW is involved in a lot of different departments in helping us do the research and do the modeling and do the monitoring and figure out exactly what is working and what isn't. If this test doesn't work, it doesn't work. Then the regulation is going to have to follow. But we do need to give this a really good fighting chance. We really do need to try to give, because as Melissa said, this is the most unique effort that's going on in the country right now, and it's pretty exciting to be a part of it.
And you've got so many businesses involved, and I would think the challenge is for businesses to go beyond just funding, and think about it as economic development and quality of life, and I know they do, but to really sort of put your money where your mouth is and say, how can we take technology, creativity that we, take the creative minds that we have here in business and elsewhere and use it to be innovative, going beyond the funding sources, sort of reacting to the environment where we have fewer dollars and fewer resources, so we all got to come together and push and make it happen, but challenging businesses to use their own creativity, whether it's technology or something else, to to help solve that problem. And I think the university too is uniquely positioned. What we've been talking about here today is the department's, the science and that kind of thing, and the arts. And I love that intersection of science and humanities that are happening here today with the stories leading this conversation. But I think that the pipeline from the university, not just in big ideas, but in people and products, needs to be more clearly aligned in order for this watershed to succeed and thrive.
I'd like to make a note. Don, you mentioned something about if we don't do it now, then there will be a regulatory approach. I'd like to offer that we are in the regulatory approach. It's because of this phosphorus rule that we have this adaptive management structure, and innovation is part of what led to this more holistic, more comprehensive, more flexible structure. And at the same time, it's almost like there's been a mini version of the scenarios in the last 5 years. There's been both a stepping up of government to create this regulatory structure within which we can act, and we have leverage on a variety of communities to step up beyond what they've been doing before. And we've had a social values focus on the lakes, and that is absolutely where Clean Lakes Alliance has been critical to this. But I think that we have to pay attention to the components that are making some of these shifts happen. There's social values. There's also government policies and government structures in place. And one thing that stood out to me in the scenarios, we got a chance to read them, all of the scenarios except abandonment and renewal had a strong government choice made in it. There's a strong government in the nested watersheds one, which as an environmental attorney, I was very tempted by that one when I first read it or first heard about it to think, this is the best thing ever. But the social, even the accelerated innovation one, had a very strong government role where government invested in innovation. It made an intentional choice to accelerate innovation, and then it boosted the businesses that were innovating by holding other businesses accountable to establish standards of pollution. So one of the things you'll read is how there are violators and there's very harsh penalties to them. And I think that's something we have to pay attention to. The only scenario that didn't have a strong government role was the abandonment and renewal. Yeah, the zombie apocalypse one. So we absolutely have to have the social values and people engaged and the private entities and private businesses engaged and everyone engaged, but we also have to have the policy structure if we want to make this happen.
Steve, what's the next step for science? Obviously, you're getting the ball rolling today, starting the conversation. You'll provide the evidence down the road of some of the things we're trying, but is there something beyond that?
Do you want me to comment on several of the comments that have occurred now?
It's your
because
show.
I've got a number of things to say. First of all, in relation to abandonment and renewal, I just want to point out that a number of our respondents felt that the population in the watershed should be lower, the human population. And so we were responding to their desire for a lower human population in our design of that scenario. So it is something that was in the sample that we took. So, Zac, you asked how you get to short-term decisions from a long-term perspective, and our approach here has been to look ahead an imaginable period of time. 60 years is well within a human lifespan. It's about the people in the room who are in their 20s are going to be here then, and people in the room my age are going to have grandchildren who are here then, and so everybody's got a stake in 2070, but it's imaginable, but it's far enough away that it's not next year's zoning decision, or it's not the November 2014 election, or something that's really tying up our short-term concerns right now. So the way you make it work is you look ahead an imaginable period of time and think about what you want the world to be like, and then you reorient your short-term decisions to begin to move the world in your preferred direction. And that is a way that the scenarios can be used, and in fact that we hope they'll be used. We are going to be fleshing out the scenarios, as we mentioned, with model results on things like food production, water quality, water quantity, air quality, carbon storage, wildlife, fish, lake recreation, a bunch of other things. So that's coming. Second point I'd like to make, going back to Don's comment about how things are going, and I strongly agree with Don that the current situation is very precarious, and the most optimistic thing you could possibly say about the current situation is that we're the Red Queen running in place. And we're just sort of barely keeping up with adverse trends in land use practices and climate that are pushing the lakes in the wrong direction. We're just sort of on a razor's edge. So we've got to do something. There was also a question about how farmers or landowners might react, and I'd like to suggest in response to that question that farmers are very accustomed to change. And if we look at how farming has changed over the preceding century up to the present, there are changes all the time. And farmers are adapting to those changes, and there are certainly going to be changes in the future, and some of them might be in governance, some might be in values, some might be in technology. But in the technological area, for example, genetic engineering is getting cheaper and cheaper and easier, and all it has to do is decentralize, to spill from the big corporations into a barn near you, and things could really take off. And that leads to my final comment, which is I am really looking forward to dining on motherless endangered species at the Harmony Bar. And we didn't mention the species we were thinking about, and I'm sure you assumed that it was cows and pigs and so on. But once you're using stem cells to develop this meat, it could be any animal you want. And so I'd like to place my order for a bald eagle burger, right? And I'll be in about 30 years to pick it up.
We'll add hot chips to that, just.
Yeah.
So we've got about a minute left for each of you, or a little less. I'd like to have you summarize what would you like the people here to do tomorrow, next month, and the next year beyond what they're doing now? Is there an extra step that anyone can take? Obviously, if you're here, you're probably a little concerned. You're probably involved in the game already, but what's the next step? Brennan, you want to start?
That's a hard one. Yeah, I'm thinking about it from a Madison perspective here, and beyond the reach of the university, which I know many of you are here because it's walkable from your jobs. But I really think the connections we can make, with beyond the borders of the university, this 21st century Wisconsin idea, have great potential. I think so. Each of us, what we can do then, you, me, and everybody else, is think about what we do every day in the watershed, and think about doing things differently. Think about what's working and what isn't, and pick up a rake and don't put your leaves on the out on the street. Keep them up on the terrace.
These scenarios are pretty provocative, and I've had the benefit, I think all of us have had the benefit of being interviewed throughout this process to get different ideas and perspectives. And so for a year and a half, we've been able to think about this and reflect on it and imagine what pieces of this we want to see in the future. And I think that's a really valuable exercise. So I encourage everyone to look at these scenarios and think about what are the components that you like in these scenarios, what don't you like, and like Steve said earlier, how do we get rid of the things we don't like? What do we have to do now to set us up for having the future that we want? And talking to people and engaging with them and having more conversations, and then engaging with the groups and agencies working on this is really valuable.
Be involved. Get yourself involved. Keep abreast of what's going on, and keep in tune with what local government's going to be looking at. We really need to be supportive of what the government initiatives are going to be going forward, budgetary wise. We need to be supporting folks like us, the Clean Lakes Alliance, but there's other nonprofits that are really doing a lot of good work to move this forward, and we just need to stay engaged, because there's going to be a lot of changes that will come, and we're going to need to vote for them. We're going to need to support budgetary increases. We're going to need to support bigger thinking actions that are going to have to occur to support what's going to happen with the scenarios.
Steve, 30 seconds.
I hope you all go to Yahara2070.org, read the stories, look at the art, look at the data and driver curves that are presented there. Think about your own best world for 2070. What do you think it should be like? What do you want to carry into the future? What do you want to leave behind? And then make your short-term personal decisions as if you want to reach that goal. I guess my final comment would be, let's have a really good Anthropocene. Let's make it as good as the Holocene was for humanity.
That was exactly on time. Thank you, everyone on the panel.